Sarah Paulson's story is one of those rare journeys that feels like a quiet storm slowly turning into a roaring hurricane, a story built not on overnight fame or easy shortcuts but on years of fear, uncertainty, reinvention, resilience, and a willingness to embrace vulnerability in a world that rewards perfection. And when we talk about Sarah Paulson, we talk about an actress who didn't just rise, she fought her way through doubt, through rejection, through feeling like she arrived too late. Like the world was moving faster than her, like the spotlight was always meant for someone else, yet she kept going, trusting that her voice, her craft, her emotions, her truth would find a place, and that courage is what makes her not only one of Hollywood's most transformative actresses but also one of the most inspiring figures for anyone who has ever been afraid to take their time, afraid to break the mold, afraid to live authentically, because Sarah Paulson shows us that timing doesn't define destiny. Persistence does, authenticity does, and the willingness to stand in your truth even when the world doesn't understand it yet does. And if you look at her early life, you'd never guess she would become the powerhouse she is today, because Sarah Paulson was not the child who grew up with a perfect path laid out for her. She grew up moving from place to place, city to city, carrying suitcases and shifting homes like seasons, trying to find stability in a world that kept changing. Yet every move carved something in her. A curiosity about people, about emotions, about the inner world of humanity, a curiosity that would later become the backbone of her acting, because Sarah never wanted to play characters, she wanted to become souls, to step inside the minds, fears, scars, and silent stories of human beings, and that obsession is why her performances cut so deeply, not because they are dramatic, but because they are painfully human. And throughout her youth, Sarah Paulson's journey continues like a slow-burning fire that refuses to go out, a steady rise fueled by passion, grit, and a fearless devotion to truth. And when you look closer at her climb, you realize that Sarah's path is not just a Hollywood story, it's a human story, the story of someone who refused to settle for who the world expected her to be, someone who kept shaping and reshaping herself with every role, every heartbreak, every risk, because Sarah Paulson never allowed herself to stay stagnant. She always moved, always evolved, always dared to dig deeper than the version of herself she knew yesterday, and that constant evolution is what makes her not only a brilliant actress but a symbol of emotional intelligence and inner strength. And what people love most about Sarah is how she takes roles others might fear, characters broken, characters complicated, characters haunted by trauma, and she approaches them with a delicate intensity, as if she is stitching pieces of humanity back together with her own hands. And whether she's screaming in terror in a horror anthology, crying silently in a dramatic monologue, or standing tall with fierce leadership in a supernatural world, Sarah brings a truthfulness that makes every moment feel alive. And part of her greatness lies in the way she listens. Sarah listens to her characters, listens to their wounds, listens to their unspoken emotions, and she transforms all that into performances so powerful that audiences don't just watch her, they feel her. And that emotional connection is rare, the kind of gift that only artists with extraordinary empathy possess. And Sarah's empathy is not a weakness, it is her superpower, a force that has allowed her to step into the minds of women from every era, every struggle, every walk of life. And each time she does, she leaves a piece of herself behind, a fingerprint on the character that only she can place. And while the world celebrates her award wins, her red carpet appearances, Sarah Paulson's rise becomes even more fascinating when you realize that she never allowed herself to be boxed in by the industry's expectations, because while many actors chase specific roles to stay safe or preserve a certain image, Sarah ran toward roles that terrified her, roles that demanded she tear apart her own assumptions, her comfort, her fears, roles that required her to expose the deepest corners of human vulnerability. And that artistic bravery became a defining part of her identity. Because Sarah Paulson is not a performer who hides behind glamour or celebrity, she steps into the rawness of human experience with a level of honesty that makes people stop scrolling, stop breathing, stop judging and simply feel. And every time she appears on screen, she reminds the world that real art is not about perfection, it's about truth. And that is why her performances linger long after the credits roll, why people replay scenes of her crying, shaking, laughing, confronting darkness. Because Sarah Paulson brings emotion to life in a way that feels almost surgical, precise yet overflowing, controlled yet devastating. and this emotional mastery didn't come from being naturally fearless. No, Sarah grew into her courage, grew into her voice, grew into her power step by step, and that is what makes her story profoundly relatable to anyone who has ever doubted themselves. Because Sarah once doubted too, and she often talks about how she spent years feeling like she was nowhere near where she wanted to be, and that quiet pain, that feeling of being overlooked, became the fuel that eventually pushed her into the spotlight she deserved. And her journey teaches a vital lesson, that some of the most unforgettable artists in the world are late bloomers, people whose talent needs time, pressure, and emotional depth to fully emerge, and when they finally rise, they rise with a force that can't be ignored. And Sarah Paulson is exactly that, a force. As Sarah Paulson's influence expands across generations, what becomes even more remarkable is how she carries her success, not with arrogance, not with distance, but with an almost disarming humility, the kind that makes people forget she is one of Hollywood's most versatile powerhouses, because Sarah has never seen herself as someone above others. Instead, she sees herself as a student of life, constantly learning, constantly evolving, constantly absorbing experiences like clay she can mold into art, and that willingness to stay teachable even after achieving massive success is one of the biggest reasons she continues rising higher with each passing year, because while many people reach a certain point and stop growing, Sarah Paulson does the opposite. She grows deeper, not just as an actress, but as a human being, someone who understands that emotional intelligence is the real foundation of great storytelling, and her ability to empathize with characters who are damaged, conflicted, morally complex, or emotionally fragile shows how deeply she connects with the universal human condition. And when she speaks about her roles, she often describes them as people she meets, people she carries, people she studies until she can feel their heartbeat inside her own, and that level of immersion is what makes her performances hauntingly unforgettable, because Sarah doesn't just portray fear, she feels it. She doesn't just portray heartbreak, she breathes it, and this depth becomes a mirror for viewers who recognize their own struggles in her characters. And one of the most powerful aspects of her story is that she never aimed to be a traditional, leading lady defined by beauty standards or romantic stereotypes. Instead, she made herself a leading force through emotional courage, by taking risks others avoided, by showing that the strongest characters are often the most complicated, the most broken, the most unpredictable. And as Sarah Paulson's journey stretches further into the fabric of modern storytelling, what becomes even clearer is that she is not just creating a career, she is creating a legacy built on authenticity, resilience, and fearless self-expression, because every chapter of her life reflects a deeper truth about what it means to remain true to yourself in a world that constantly tells you to change, to soften, to shrink. Yet Sarah refuses to shrink for anyone, and that refusal has become a quiet revolution, inspiring people around the world to stop apologizing for their differences, their struggles, their timing, and their dreams, because Sarah's story is not the tale of someone who had everything handed to her, it is the story of someone who fought for every opportunity, someone who endured rejection after rejection, someone who kept walking through the darkness long before she ever saw the light. And that persistence carved her into the artist she is today, layered, complex, thoughtful, brave, and capable of expressing emotions so raw they feel like confessions whispered directly into the hearts of viewers. And the more you study her craft, the more you realize that Sarah Paulson doesn't simply act, she transforms, dissolves, reinvents, allowing herself to become unrecognizable each time she steps into a new role. Because she believes that storytelling is not about looking beautiful or remaining comfortable but about revealing the parts of humanity people are afraid to touch, afraid to confront, afraid to say out loud, and her willingness to explore those emotional shadows makes her one of the most important performers of this generation, someone whose contributions to film and television will be studied, analyzed, and admired long after her time, because she brings a psychological depth to every character that makes audiences forget they are watching fiction. And this is why Sarah Paulson's roles stick in people's minds for years. And as Sarah Paulson's influence deepens across the entertainment world, what becomes truly extraordinary is how she manages to balance vulnerability and power with such effortless grace, because while many artists hide parts of themselves to maintain a polished image, Sarah does the opposite. She reveals her uncertainties, her fears, her insecurities, allowing the world to see that even the strongest performers are human. And this transparency makes her more magnetic, because people don't connect with perfection, they connect with truth, and Sarah Paulson embodies truth in a way that few in her industry dare to, showing that emotional openness is not a weakness but a kind of quiet bravery that gives others permission to be honest with themselves, and this honesty spills into her work, shaping characters that feel painfully real, beautifully flawed, and unforgettably alive. Characters who remind viewers of times they were afraid, times they were hopeful, times they were broken but trying to hold themselves together, and Sarah channels all of that into performances that don't just entertain, they heal, they challenge, they awaken something inside the audience, something that whispers, "You're not alone," and this emotional gift is why her presence on screen feels like both a storm and a sanctuary, intense yet comforting, powerful yet tender, and the more she grows, the more the world realizes that Sarah Paulson is not simply an actress, she is a storyteller of the human spirit, someone who translates silence, fear, trauma, and resilience into art with a depth that cannot be taught, only lived, and this is why her rise has been so profound, because it wasn't built on shortcuts, hype, or superficial trends, it was built on substance, on years of refining her craft, on endless hours studying motivations, intentions, emotions, on choosing roles that terrified her because she knew the only way to evolve was to walk directly into the unknown.